My name is Daniel, and I'm a single father to my 10-year-old daughter, Lily. It's just been the two of us since her mother passed away 5 years ago. Lily is my whole world, my light in the darkest times. We've always been close, sharing a bond that I thought nothing could ever break. A few months ago, our lives were turned upside down. It was an ordinary Saturday afternoon. Lily and I were at the park, enjoying one of our many weekend outings. She was on the swings, laughing and calling out for me to watch how high she could go. I turned away for just a second, and that's when it happened. The swing set chain snapped, and Lily was sent flying through the air, landing hard on the ground. The next moments were a blur of panic and fear. I rushed to her side, my heart pounding in my chest as I called for help. Lily was unconscious, her small body frighteningly still. The ambulance ride to the hospital felt like an eternity, and all I could think about was how I couldn't lose her too. When we arrived at the hospital, the doctors worked quickly, and I was left to pace the waiting room, consumed by worry. Hours passed, but finally, a doctor came out and told me Lily was stable. She had a concussion and a few broken bones, but she was going to be okay. Relief washed over me like a tidal wave, and I felt a joy I hadn't known in years. Lily's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. Within days, she was awake and alert, her bright smile returning as she assured me she was fine. The doctors were amazed at how quickly she bounced back, and I was just grateful to have my little girl safe and sound. At first, everything seemed normal. Lily was back to her old self, laughing and playing, filling our home with the warmth that only she could bring. I thought the worst was behind us. Little did I know, our nightmare was only beginning. At first, the changes were so subtle that I almost didn't notice them. Lily had always been a bit of a daydreamer, so when she started spending more time alone in her room, I didn't think much of it. She would sit in the corner, her eyes fixed on the wall, whispering softly to herself. I assumed it was part of her recovery, her way of processing the trauma she had experienced. But then, her whispers grew louder, more animated. I would walk by her room and hear her having full conversations, pausing as if someone was responding to her. When I asked her who she was talking to, she would just smile and say, "My new friend." It sent a chill down my spine, but I brushed it off as a child's imagination. Lily's behavior started to become more erratic. She used to love playing outside, but now she seemed content to stay indoors, often staring at nothing for long periods. She became distant, her once vibrant personality replaced by a quiet, unsettling calm. She began drawing strange, abstract shapes and symbols that I couldn't make sense of. When I asked her about them, she would just shrug and say they were for her friend. One night, I heard her crying. I rushed to her room and found her sitting on the floor, tears streaming down her face. When I asked her what was wrong, she looked at me with wide, frightened eyes and said, "He's angry." I tried to comfort her, but she wouldn't tell me who he was. She just kept repeating that he was angry and that she had to be good. My concern grew with each passing day. I took her to see a therapist, hoping they could help, but Lily refused to talk about what was happening. She insisted everything was fine, but I could see the fear in her eyes. I wanted to believe her, to think that this was just a phase, a reaction to the accident. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. I started to notice other things, too. Lily's once bright and cheerful room seemed to grow darker, colder. I would find her toys moved around, arranged in strange patterns. Sometimes, I would wake up in the middle of the night and hear her talking, but when I went to check on her, she would be fast asleep. I tried to rationalize it all. Children have vivid imaginations, I told myself. She's been through a lot, and this is her way of coping. But the changes were too stark, too disturbing to ignore. My little girl was slipping away from me, and I was powerless to stop it. The changes in Lily's behavior became impossible to ignore. One morning, while cleaning her room, I found a stack of drawings hidden under her bed. These weren't the innocent doodles of a 10-year-old. They were dark, twisted images that sent shivers down my spine. Figures with hollow eyes and gaping mouths, strange symbols, and shadows that seemed to move on the paper. One drawing, in particular, stood out, a tall, faceless figure standing in the corner of her room. The discovery left me unnerved, but I tried to stay calm. I gently asked Lily about the drawings, hoping for some innocent explanation. She looked at me with those wide, innocent eyes and said, "They're just pictures, Daddy. He likes them." When I asked who he was, she just smiled and went back to her room, closing the door behind her. Lily's conversations with the wall grew more intense and coherent. I would stand outside her door, listening as she spoke in hushed tones, her voice rising and falling as if she were having a real conversation. Sometimes it sounded like she was arguing, her voice tinged with frustration or fear. Other times, she would laugh, a sound that should have been comforting but instead filled me with dread. One night, I heard her talking and decided to confront her. I opened the door slowly, trying not to startle her. She was sitting in the corner, facing the wall, her body rigid and tense. "Lily," I called softly. She didn't respond. I took a step closer and called her name again. This time, she turned to look at me, her eyes wide and empty. "He says you shouldn't be here," she whispered. A cold chill ran down my spine. "Who says that, sweetheart?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "My friend," she replied, turning back to the wall. "He doesn't like it when you interrupt us." My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't see or hear anyone, but the fear in Lily's eyes was real. I tried to pull her away from the wall, but she resisted, clinging to the floor, screaming that she couldn't leave him. It took all my strength to calm her down and get her to bed. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with questions and fears. The next day, I found more drawings, hidden throughout the house, behind picture frames, under the couch, even taped to the underside of the dining table. Each one was more disturbing than the last, filled with the same dark figures and strange symbols. I couldn't make sense of them, but I knew they meant something. They were messages, warnings, from whoever, or whatever, was tormenting my daughter. My paranoia grew. I started seeing shadows in the corners of my eyes, hearing whispers when I was alone. I felt like I was being watched, and the house, once a place of warmth and safety, now felt cold and menacing. I searched for answers, spending hours online, reading about hauntings, possessions, anything that could explain what was happening. But the more I learned, the less sense it all made. I was losing my grip on reality. I started questioning my own sanity, wondering if I was imagining it all. But then I would see Lily, her once bright and happy face now pale and haunted, and I knew this was real. Something was happening to her, something beyond my understanding, and I was powerless to stop it. I knew I needed help, but I didn't know where to turn. My friends and family thought I was overreacting, that Lily was just going through a phase. But I knew better. This wasn't normal. This was something dark, something evil, and it was only getting worse. I couldn't take it anymore. The fear, the uncertainty, the sense that something malevolent had taken hold of my daughter and my home. It was driving me to the brink. I knew I had to confront Lily about what was happening, even if it meant facing whatever darkness had entered our lives. One evening, after dinner, I decided to talk to her. Lily was in her room, once again talking to the wall. I stood outside for a moment, gathering my courage, before pushing the door open and stepping inside. "Lily," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "we need to talk." She turned to look at me, her eyes dark and distant. "Daddy, you shouldn't be here." I swallowed hard. "Lily, I need you to tell me what's going on. Who are you talking to?" She hesitated, glancing back at the wall. "My friend," she said softly. "He doesn't like it when you interrupt us." My heart pounded in my chest. "Who is he, Lily? What does he want?" She looked at me with a mixture of fear and defiance. "He's always been here. He watches us. He says you can't understand because you don't believe." A cold shiver ran down my spine. "Lily, this friend of yours, he's not real. You're talking to nothing. It's your imagination." Her face twisted in anger. "He is real. You just don't see him. He told me you wouldn't believe me. He told me you'd try to take him away." I stepped closer, trying to reach out to her, but she backed away, her eyes wide with fear. "Lily, I'm not trying to take anything away. I just want to help you. Please, let me help you." She shook her head violently. "No, Daddy, You don't understand. He's angry with you. He says you're in the way." The words sent a jolt of terror through me. "Lily, listen to me. We need to get you some help. There's something wrong, and we can fix it, but you have to trust me." She stared at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she said, "He won't let you." Before I could respond, the lights flickered and the room grew cold. I felt an oppressive weight settle over me, and the shadows seemed to grow deeper, darker. Lily's eyes rolled back in her head, and she began to speak in a voice that wasn't her own, a deep, guttural whisper that filled the room with dread. "You can't save her," the voice said. "She belongs to us now." I felt a surge of panic and fear, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Lily, fight it. You're stronger than this. Come back to me." The room grew colder still, and I could see my breath in the air. The shadows seemed to pulse, growing larger and more menacing. Lily's body convulsed, and she let out a blood-curdling scream. "Daddy, help me!" she cried, her voice breaking through the darkness. I lunged forward, wrapping my arms around her, trying to pull her back from whatever abyss was claiming her. "I'm here, Lily. I'm here. I won't let them take you." The shadows swirled around us, and I felt a cold, malevolent presence pressing in on all sides. But I held on, refusing to let go. "You can't have her," I shouted into the darkness. "She's my daughter." The oppressive weight lifted slightly, and the room seemed to warm by a fraction. Lily's body went limp in my arms, and she began to sob. "Daddy, I'm scared," she whispered. I held her tightly, my own tears falling freely. "I know, sweetheart. I know. We'll get through this. I promise." But as I held her, I knew that this was far from over. The atmosphere in the house had grown dangerously tense, and I could feel the presence lurking, waiting for its next opportunity. Our home was no longer a safe haven. It had become a battleground, and I was determined to fight for my daughter, no matter what it took. I knew the battle was far from over. The oppressive atmosphere in the house grew heavier each day, and Lily's behavior became more erratic and frightening. She would wake up in the middle of the night, screaming in terror, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. I could see the toll it was taking on her, and my heart broke a little more each time I saw the fear in her eyes. One night, things reached a terrifying climax. I was jolted awake by a loud crash coming from Lily's room. I rushed down the hall, my heart pounding in my chest. The door to her room was wide open, and the sight that greeted me was something out of a nightmare. Lily was standing in the center of the room, surrounded by a whirlwind of papers and toys. Her eyes were dark and empty, and she was speaking in that same deep, guttural voice. "You can't save her," the voice said. "She belongs to us." The shadows in the room seemed to pulse and writhe, and the temperature dropped to an unbearable cold. I could feel the malevolent presence pressing in on all sides, and I knew I had to act fast. Desperation gave me strength as I lunged forward, grabbing Lily and pulling her away from the center of the room. "Let her go," I shouted into the darkness. "She's my daughter, and you can't have her." The shadows seemed to tighten around us, and Lily's body convulsed in my arms. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and she let out a blood-curdling scream. "Daddy, help me!" she cried, her voice breaking through the darkness for a moment. I held her tightly, refusing to let go. "I'm here, Lily. I'm here. Fight it, sweetheart. You're stronger than this." The room grew colder still, and the shadows seemed to close in. I could feel the presence fighting to take her from me, but I refused to give in. "You can't have her," I shouted again. "She's mine." With a surge of strength, I pulled Lily towards the door, away from the swirling darkness. The shadows clawed at us, and the air was filled with an otherworldly howl. But I kept moving, one step at a time, dragging her towards the light of the hallway. Finally, we stumbled out of the room and into the hallway. The moment we crossed the threshold, the temperature returned to normal, and the oppressive weight lifted slightly. Lily collapsed in my arms, sobbing and shaking. I held her tightly, whispering words of comfort and reassurance. But even as I comforted her, I could feel the presence lingering, watching us. The house still felt heavy and dark, and I knew that whatever had taken hold of her wasn't gone. It was just waiting, biding its time. The next day, I packed a bag and took Lily to stay with my sister. I couldn't risk keeping her in that house any longer. As we drove away, I looked back at the house, feeling a deep sense of dread. I knew that the battle wasn't over, and that the entity would try to take her again. Lily seemed to recover slowly in the safety of my sister's home, but there was always a lingering fear in her eyes. She refused to talk about what had happened, and I didn't push her. I was just grateful to have her safe, for now, but the sense of dread never left me. I knew that the entity was still out there, waiting for its chance to strike again, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we would never truly be free of it. The line between reality and the supernatural had been blurred beyond recognition, and I was left with a haunting sense of ambiguity about the true nature of the entity and what it wanted. As I watched Lily play in the yard, I couldn't help but wonder if we would ever truly be safe. The fear and uncertainty gnawed at me, a constant reminder of the darkness that had invaded our lives. And I knew that I would do whatever it took to protect my daughter, no matter what. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that our nightmare was far from over, and that the entity was still out there, waiting for its chance to return.